welcome you to 42nd Street and the Waterfall, which is our creative space. We work with professional artists and we work with young people. That's both young artists and also the young people who might access or want to access mental health services at 42nd Street. And our aim is to create a broad range of ways that young people can access support, be that one-to-one support, counselling, therapy, or taking part in a creative project. We also host artist residencies, which are very kindly sponsored by a foundation called... No, it's not me. Kim Linfield Trust, thank you. The Kim Linfield Trust, which was set up in the memory of a young woman who lost her life, and her mother and friends and family fundraised for us, and they funded a series of artist residencies. So we've got 3 this year, one of whom is Haydn, okay. And the next of which is actually sitting to our left. This residency with Haydn Gardner, also known as Miscreation, has been really successful. People say it's the best use of the space by an artist we've seen so far, which is fabulous. I won't embarrass you much. The idea for the artist residency programme is that we put out calls to any artist under the age of 30 who wants 2 weeks and a small amount of money to do whatever they want in terms of responding to the space, responding to young people they meet, or responding to the area. And we work with a selection panel of young people, and Kerry from the Kim Linfield Trust, to choose 3 artists. We only had money for 2 originally, but we couldn't get it any narrower than 3, so Kerry gets some extra money, which is rather nice. And we're hoping it's been successful to carry on in future years with that. I'm not going to talk anymore, that's it, I'm just going to chair proceedings. We're going to hear from Jon Adams in a second, and also Haydn. And Haydn will be also giving, for those at the end, we'll give it the last part of the roundtable action. Haydn's going to give a little tour, artist tour around his exhibition. So Haydn Gardner you've been practicing as a professional artist for...
If we're going as Miscreation, just about a year and a half now.
And has recently moved to Manchester. Haydn's work explores life on the autistic spectrum and anxiety and some mental health issues that go around that, and his own experience of working in the mediums that you work in. And Jon Adams is a neurodiverse artist. Tell me if I'm getting any of this wrong. A neurodiverse artist who works across art forms and has one foot in academia as well, and is a cultural ambassador for the National Autistic Society, and has also done quite a lot of work with Arts Council on and off throughout the years, and runs a project called Flow, which we're going to hear about later, which is all about tackling some of the difficulties that neurodiverse artists have in a neurotypical world. Are we all familiar with the neurodiverse, neurotypical as words here? Okay, I'm going to pass on to Jon, who's going to start talking a little bit about the context of being a neurodiverse artist, what needs to happen to change the situation as it is, and talk a little bit about Flow. And I'd encourage you to interject with any questions you have, but we'll have a lot of time for discussion in a while, but please feel free. Are you happy with it?
Oh no, totally. I don't want to sit here and just waffle on. I'll just talk about those subjects briefly, and I'm very open to questions, very open to answering. Yeah.
And we're really fortunate to have Jon here because it's quite a way away, and we made contact originally, I think probably on Twitter, and we've been having discussions, and we've already cooked up a future project, which is a fantastic outcome. But I'm looking forward to a really good discussion and debate. So,
talking about Twitter has kind of changed the world for neurodivergent people over the last 3 or 4 years. And kind of Flow, which I'll talk about in a minute, has come from that. And with people like Haydn's dad, Alan, who's also a cultural ambassador for the NAS, a lot more actually neurodivergent, actually autistic people are actually starting to speak for themselves. And where Twitter has come in is it's united a lot of people together. And one of the basic things about Twitter and sharing your lived experience is that you find out that other people feel exactly the same way or have had the same experiences, which kind of is encouraging. And you can also share barriers too. And it's kind of grown into very much a campaigning and solidarity neurodiverse movement. But let's just say a little bit about context, because one of the things, I mean, I'm old, I went to school when dinosaurs ruled the earth basically, and I didn't know I was autistic. I have a DX of Asperger's, but I tend to use autistic because sometimes there's a lot of issues between comparing, and using functioning labels, which I really don't like, to divide the community. I wasn't diagnosed with being autistic till I was 53 a few years ago, and I had a DX of dyslexia when I was 39. So my school time was quite fun, let's say. I didn't go to art college because a teacher tore a picture up in front of the class because I spelt my name wrong on it after the head wanted it on the wall. I was 10, it was 1970, and that stopped me going to art college. But where do we fit? Often autistic people or neurodivergent people don't feel they fit in a society that doesn't accept them. And this causes issues for us. Society follows traditions, society follows myths, and it follows stereotyping. And most of the myths and stereotypes that have been written, say, about being autistic, have come from non-autistic people. And we've never really had a voice before until Twitter. Or it's never really been listened to, let's say. Recently there have been a few articles coming out, surprise, surprise, most of the socialising issues that autistic people face are caused by society, not by the autistic person. That's something we've been saying for years. And this is where we dabble a little bit with academia. Because, as autistic people, and language is important. When we talk about the context of neurodiversity, a lot of people don't accept it. Some very basic things about neurodiversity. If you think about it like biodiversity, the world is made up of everything, and it all interacts together. If the world was made entirely of cats, some people would like that. But if the world was totally made out of trees, it wouldn't exist. We need cats and trees. And sometimes people, if you were to use the analogy of looking at a tree as being a failed evolutionary cat, you wouldn't see the beauty in the tree. Everything has its place, and neurodiversity is kind of the theory that, we're all perfectly, no matter what you say, and I prefer to use, the word condition rather than any other pathology. Neurotypes are all needed. If we're all the same, we'd all walk off a cliff at the same time or do something. We need people who think differently. Unfortunately, throughout history, that difference has always been looked down on. So the world is made out of, it's neurodiverse. Fine. You can't be a neurodiverse person, though, because you can't be everything at once. You can't be a biodiverse cat. A cat is part of diversity. So the world is made up of neurotypical people who kind of follow the accepted norm of what is normal, which is something that we need to rebel against, and neurodivergent people who diverge from what people consider the norm. And diversity at the moment isn't diverse enough because it doesn't include us. or it puts us in the wrong boxes. You know, inclusion isn't inclusive if you don't include neurodivergent people on their terms, not what you think they need. So, you know, having worked within the disability arts movement for a long time and kind of rebelled against the way that people, in their terminology of hidden disabled, were kind of sidelined. You know, although society disables us, it puts barriers in our way, I don't feel that I have to define as a disabled person, because I don't feel that due to my being autistic that I'm a disabled person innately. You know, I have mental health issues because not everybody feels like that, and you're kind of treated quite roughly. So I have PTSD and all the glorious things that go with it. You know, I probably had CPTSD from the very beginning, from when that teacher tore that picture up, because I realised that life wasn't going to be gentle. And it certainly hasn't been. And until society recognises that we are different but in a holistic way, not a broken way, it will carry on. Now today, actually, as we're talking, hopefully there's a huge debate in Parliament about mental health and autism going on, because it really is a huge barrier. Most creative, artistic, autistic people I've met have mental health issues because they're unfulfilled. Society doesn't fulfill them. They can't do what they need to do. And, you know, that's something we'd like to change. And, you know, if we're looking at the parallels with the deaf and disabled movement, you know, big D, little d, I don't, and a lot of other people, and Flow doesn't stand that we're a sub-branch or a subculture of disability art. We have our own culture. We deserve to stand on our own 2 feet. And if we're saying that we're innately different and part of humanity, it kind of puts us on the same level as LGBTQ, BAME and disability. We're peers. You know, if anything, because we think differently and we're innately differently, we are more allied to the LGBTQ movement. You know, and where they were 50 years ago, fighting against the stigma of it being a mental health issue and having to be not beaten out of you, but certainly conversion therapies. We look at where autism is now and see lots of conversion therapy. You know, why can't we just be who we're meant to be? So, you know, if we're putting it in there, you know, we need allies to change. We can't do this on our own. We won't make a change by chaining ourselves to railings. We need to work with people who are allied and who will speak with us, but who don't speak for us. There's, you know, if you were to make LGBTQ policy without the involvement of LGBTQ people, it would be seen as absolutely unacceptable. So why is autism policy made by non-autistic people? You know, these are the things that we, you know, that need putting on the table, that need talking about. And, you know, how do we facilitate neurodivergent artists? You know, there's 2 ways of this. There's 2 ways of looking at it. You know, as an individual artist, we need encouraging. We need to be listened to. You know, most autistic people have mental health issues because it's not my choice that I'm an autistic person, but it's other people's choice for the abuse or the misunderstanding they give us. So the boot's quite firmly on the other foot. You know, autistic people need informed choice about where they fit, rather than being told or directed by other people who are non-autistic. You know, if we're saying that, you know, you wouldn't have a disability arts organisation run by non-disabled people, well, then we shouldn't have neurodivergent organisations run by non-neurodivergent people. See, it's another reason why I don't feel we fit in the disability arts movement, because we're asking people who have not got our lived experience to make policy for us, and it often doesn't work out what we need. So as individual artists, we need that encouragement and we need opportunity. But with galleries, it's kind of like different. You know, like I said, inclusion's not inclusive enough, and it's a big buzzword at the moment. And actually neurodiversity is becoming a big buzzword too. But it's kind of being appropriated by other people. There's a lot of talk about appropriation of culture. You know, we have our culture. You know, we should be leading on it, not neurotypical people. We should be doing it in conjunction with organisations, in conjunction with galleries. Galleries should involve neurodivergent people from the very beginning. They should be able to walk in, suggest an idea, write it, and present it, and do it. You know, it's kind of not rocket science. If you want to know how a neurodivergent person feels, then ask us. You know, but that's often not the case. People assume, and you know, the road to hell is based on, hell is based on, on good intentions, isn't it? You know, galleries and organisations, we need recognition. You know, if we're not recognised, we won't be respected. If we're not respected, we won't have that peer relationship with the gallery. It should be about what we make, not what other people consider wrong with us. You know, if the academic world can change, then so can the arts world. The academic world has been obsessed up till now with finding cures for us, etc. You know, autistic mice, all that sort of nonsense. Now they've recognised that they need to work out how they can make life more acceptable for us. You know, what we need, what we're asking for. And surprise, surprise, one of the top 10 priorities for autism research is now mental health. Well, it is number one. Because with good mental health, we can do anything. With poor mental health, we can't fight for ourselves. And the state of the mental health system at the moment needs a radical overhaul. No, you know, despite they don't understand autism as yet. Now, language is one interesting thing. I prefer identity first language. Now, you might think that's strange because, you know, I say I'm an autistic person, not a person with autism. I don't bring autism with me. It's not in my pocket. It's not an option. You know, you don't say a person with gayness. So why would you say a person with autism? Well, you would do if you regard autism as being a pathology. You know, but that's what we want to change. Autism is a state and a way of life. So it's an autistic person. And that little change in language, you know, will make so much of a difference to people's attitudes to us. Yes, there's a lot of arguments on Twitter, and often or not you find that parents, some parents let's say, because a lot of parents are actually allies to us, because us older autistic don't speak for their children but give hints as to what life could be like and may be like, and support, because we're very interested in all autistic people being fulfilled. But person first language is still taught in medical schools. You know, you mustn't call someone an autistic person, that's wrong. Well, we're here to say actually, no, it's right. What is flow? Like I say, 2 years ago I helped launch a book in London, and I don't know if you've read it, but that book was called Neurotribes. It's by a guy called Steve Silverman. He's not autistic, he's actually gay, and he wrote a history of why people need to think differently about people who think differently. And as a gay man, he's probably faced exactly the same barriers that we do of non-acceptance, and I think full marks to him. And he kind of highlighted the difference between the way the Americans think about being autistic and the way the British feel about being autistic, and all the rumpus about Hans Asperger, etc. And in the States, you know, it's more about, oh dear, you know, it's everyone's fault, let's cure it. Whereas in this country, it's more, and becoming more accepted, that it's about, hey, you know, we're different. Let's work with these people to make their difference count. Because that's after all, that's what we want. We just want to be useful. We want to exist in a society that gives us, accepts our lived experience. And, you know, as Flow, we've written a manifesto, and we worked with some galleries, and funny enough, even as far as Australia, they've taken up the manifesto. All we're asking for is parity of understanding, parity of opportunity and funding, and just respect and recognition. There are 3 parts to Flow. There's a research, encouraging peer research within universities, not necessarily looking at creativity, but looking at the things in society that affect us. Because as an artist, I'm affected by society, I'm affected by my mental health, I'm affected by whether I've got another job, whether I can work. These things are barriers. They don't have to be arts barriers to stop you being an artist. And, obviously we're campaigning and educating on a more enlightened view for autistic people. So we wipe out traditions, we wipe out stereotypes, and we wipe out myths. The myths that I'm talking about is autistic people, feel nothing. They have no empathy for anyone else. When in fact the opposite's probably true. These sort of things. We can't use sarcasm, really, etc., etc. And the third, the most important part of Flow, because Flow is an attitude. Flow is about making safe spaces for neurodivergent creatives to make and show their work. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a physical space. It's about attitudes. If galleries get their attitudes right, they become safe. Is artists, is encouraging artists, is making a hub for artists, is making an artist feel that they're not alone. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. The old myth that autistic people want to sit in their room and not join in is a myth. I've always desperately wanted to meet and be with other people, but it has to be on my terms, not theirs. And there's a big difference between being alone and lonely. One particular talk I did, a parent stood up and asked me, my son, he's 7, he sits in his room, he plays Lego and games all day, and seems to live in his own world. He's missing out on ours, what can I do to make him join in? And I said, nothing, because one day he'll show you the world that he's in. Because, why do we have to fit what other people's opinion is of us? Why can't we ask them to fit ours and accept ours, So Flow is just kicking off. We're still making our website. Haydn Gardner is one of our patrons, and we just want the best for other artists, creatives, and for galleries to look at neurodivergent people in a very different way. In fact, we want society to look at us in a different way, so we're no longer invisible, we're no longer sidelined, and we no longer go unrecognised for what we can do. So that's what I'd like to say, to kick it off.
Thank you very
And I always
much.
get stuck with when people say, let's kick this off. Like the round table. Who wants to kick off? Where's the ball? Okay.
Thank you very much, Jon. Has anybody got any comments, questions, insightful remarks?
I was wondering what you thought about, I've got no neuroscience in my head at all, but something about neuroplasticity and neurodiversity and change. Is there kind of research into that? And there's a fluidity within, and it's not, you said it was really important distinction, you're an autistic person, not a person with autism. But you're also an autistic person with the capability for change and for neurological change as well. I just wondering whether that was relevant or...
I'm not actually sure. There are a lot of things that are binary and there are a lot of things that are unbinary. One of the things within the neurodivergent community is I believe there's a greater gender fluidity. There's more it's very much easier for a neurotypical person to try and accommodate a neurodivergent person than it is the other way around. I don't know what other people around here think. I'm not saying that everything, I think there's a responsibility on neurodivergent people not to pull the drawbridge up and say, right, if you don't do this, we're not doing anything. There is opportunity to learn on both sides, but we then get into trouble with theory of mind. And what I mean by theory of mind is, I can't think as an autistic person what a non-autistic person thinks in the way they see the world. But miraculously, for years, it's been assumed that neurotypical people can marvellously see what's going on in an autistic person's mind and, tell them what they need. Well, actually, theory of mind is double. I believe that a neurotypical person has no more idea of what it's like to live as a neurodivergent person than the other way around. And this is why both sides need to respect what each say. There is possibility of change. If I look back over my life, I've had to adapt. I've had to become resilient, but a lot of that is learned behaviour, not changing the way that I'm made up. While we're talking about, what is a neurodiverse condition? Well, all the A's, all the D's, and maybe a few more. And maybe PTSD, because that kind of rewires and physically affects your brain. So things do happen, but I don't know much about neuroplasticity, I'm afraid.
It just
No, it's very
into my head
interesting.
about the fluidity and the fact. Your organisation is called Flow, Flow.
Yes. It's Flow Observatorium in the full time.
I printed off
Lovely.
Oh, it's this.
it's
we've
some copies
got-
of your manifesto actually,
Yeah,
so
people are very welcome
people
to have.
take.
And, you won't forget the branding.
Blob.
Yeah. We have been told off by people.
Flow.
Yes.
I quite like it. And why did you call it Flow?
A couple of things, because when there's the psychological concept of flow where everything else disappears and you're so intent on doing what you're doing. And as an autistic artist, that is me.
Yeah.
When I'm into something,
You're in the zone.
yes. Well, one interesting, and I'd love to know what other people around the table find as barriers to them making and creating. But a lot of the artists that we talk to break stereotypes and moulds too, because they're predominantly female, and everyone is compelled to make. The money side doesn't matter. It's about getting what's in here out. And a lot of autistic neurodivergent artists are interested in social engagement. The traditional stereotype is we don't like people. Couldn't be more wrong. We're just amazed at some of the antics that some neurotypical people get up to, and we have to make artwork about it. Because you just couldn't make it up. I'm being rather socially engaged work. And we tend to be polymath too. We're interested in everything, and art science especially, and cross. Some people will stick to one media and that's it. But a lot of autistic artists want to do everything, and they sort of travel between, writing poetry or blogs or performance or doing talks or drawing with all sorts of different things. And that I think all these things are generally understood, underknown, whatever you like to put it, because people have never been interested, have never asked us what we need to join in. So we've always kept to one side, in the myth that we stand at the side in parties. Well, I don't understand parties, but there we go. So it's about drawing us in, and drawing, neurodivergent people towards us too. Temple Grandin talks about challenging children. We all need a challenge. It's just where that challenge then tips over into a mental health issue because we've been traumatised. That's the fine, delining point.
Haydn, do you mind if I draw you in? What do you find to be the barriers for you, as a kind of emerging artist, the barriers for you in the art world?
I think for me personally, I've had every opportunity that I've been given has led on to another opportunity. And I believe that that comes down to the fact that I'm enthusiastic about what I do. And I think as someone who has kind of spent a lot of his life away from socialising and I kind of did what it is that I did and didn't really care for much what everyone else was doing, that I have kind of this unique perspective, and I've kind of watched how people act, how people are. Throughout uni, I think that was the way, and then I've come into the art world and I'm able to be articulate, I'm able to talk about my work, I'm able to be very sort of upfront and be able to talk quite honestly about my work. But then I think a lot of people also struggle in that fact, and I think a lot of people think that people on this, like basically autistic artists in general, they all have a very similar skill set. And like as people have, as a society, everybody has a different skill set. So I may be really articulate, I may be really, really good at this particular one thing, but when it comes to sort of branching out and being able to do other things. So, for example, I have been searching for part-time work to be able to support myself to do this. I've been searching for now since July. I think I've applied for about 46 different positions and I haven't got a single one. And I think it comes down to a lot of different things, but I feel that some places are willing to give you the opportunity, like the Horsefall, like 42nd Street. I have the opportunity to display my artwork here. I've had the opportunity to talk about my work and what it is that I do. But in another sense, in terms of work, I'm capable, I have skills, I have things that I can bring to the table. Again, there are things that I'm not so good at, but I haven't had the opportunity to get work to support myself. And I think it's basically I think it's important to give people the ability to be able to support themselves. Because I think a lot of the time as a confidence issue, definitely. I think you kind of have to learn as you go. You make mistakes, you kind of... I think when it came to social media, you put your artwork out there and you think, well, people aren't engaging with what I'm doing. People aren't necessarily getting what it is I'm doing. And I would rework things, I'd sort of like strategize how I would approach that situation. And the more I started to approach it lightheartedly and more as I am as a person rather than this serious... Like you see a lot of things online of art pieces. You've got the title of the piece, what it was made on. I never engage in any of that. As someone who studied fine art, I was put to sleep by that side of things. I would get excited and want to talk about the themes, want to talk about the material, why I like that material in particular. And I think a lot of galleries don't necessarily appreciate that side of it. That kind of been able to... I think a lot of artists in general don't necessarily have an enthusiasm about what it is they do to an extent. And I don't mean that in a kind of... they're not enthusiastic about what they do. It's displaying it in an articulate manner.
Portraying the role of a serious artist.
Yeah. It's like you've got to try and kind of... what it is that's going on in here, you have to find a way of getting it out there. And I think as someone in my position, I've had a lot of time to think about this. I've come out of situations where my mental health has been to the point of almost suicide. It's been sort of really critical, and it's been critical towards why I do what I do now, because I kind of started to delve into the things that I enjoyed the most in life, trying to work out what it is that I wanted to do and what it is I wanted to move forward with. And I think artwork as a whole and the ability to be able to create started off as a sense to escape. It was escapism to begin with, but then I used it as a platform to communicate. So a lot of the time, I had a lot of anxiety issues, I had a lot of problems with travelling into uni. And you'd go in and you'd have to explain to the tutor, sorry, it takes me 2.5 hours to get in on the train because I have panic attacks along the way. And they just they don't get where you're coming from. They don't understand why. I mean, they sympathise, but they don't understand to us why that was a thing. And you kind of, it's a constant battle of having to explain yourself to us why something has happened a certain way. And it's like, so for example, you'll approach a brief differently. You've been given a brief, you'll approach the brief differently, and you have to explain to us why you have done something in a piece, or why you didn't follow, why you didn't follow the brief. I find briefs quite challenging a lot of the time, because in my head, I have an idea of what I wanted to do, but the brief that has been given to you is not what they're looking for. And I think sometimes...
What do you mean by that?
So the way I interpret the brief is different to what they were looking for. A lot of the time, a brief and what they put out as a brief, they have an idea what they're looking for before they've even started.
Absolutely.
And the way that I approach a situation in general will always be different to start off with. And that's why that's why my artwork in general, I didn't consider my artwork to be different. There's a lot of things that I consider not to be a thing, and then someone will tell me, no, that's a thing. Like, for example, my ears. I said recently I didn't think they were that big in terms of the distance they've been stretched. And then people go, no, they're huge. I don't think about things the same way that people would think about things. I don't consider visual elements as something that comes across to somebody else. And I think it becomes a barrier. I have to, when I go to events, so we went to the Whitworth Monday, and I dressed up as I normally would. And I suddenly realised halfway through that I'd attended this event where everybody was all dressed up in blazers and shirts, and I'd got more holes in jeans than jeans. And I thought afterwards... It was a strange event though, wasn't it?
It
was a very strange event, but I thought afterwards that probably wasn't considered socially acceptable, and it hadn't occurred to me once that probably wouldn't have been the sort of thing you're supposed to wear to an event like that. And it's not so much of kind of being an advocate of, you can wear whatever you like. It's more of kind of, you kind of try to learn and try to have to adapt everything to be able to go through that series of events. Like, I find travelling and find getting to places really difficult. And you realise sometimes when you're on the bus that people are looking at you. Why are people looking at me? And I realise I've been tapping excessively on something to the rhythm of whatever I'm listening to, and it's driving them nuts. And I'm not even, a lot of the time I'm not aware, and you have to constantly pull yourself back.
Yes.
You constantly have to stop yourself acting a certain way, and that's for no other reason than it's not something they will do. They don't get why you're doing it. And I think in terms of the art world and in terms of the gallery spaces and all of this, for me, it's not been a massive issue, because I think I've been incredibly lucky to go from opportunity to opportunity. And because I've advertised myself, in a sense, as an autistic artist, and I've advertised myself as an autistic artist not because it's different, but to more of kind of, there aren't role models who are autistic, that are sort of like positive role models. Only really been in the last few years that they're kind of, like Chris Packham recently has been very sort of open about it. My dad's TV show in the past has been sort of open about it. There aren't many sort of advocates that kind of take, look, you can do this. There is no sort of, a lot of the time, I mean, in my household, we were all brought up to believe we could do what it is we wanted to do. Like, we've all followed our separate paths. My brother here, he designs clothes. Dad is my parents have supported him in what he wants to do. My sister is currently doing graphic design, who's supported her in what she wants to do. I've got a friend who wants to do essentially what it is that I do, and his parents have told him no. He has Asperger's. His parents are like, no. He's literally been cut off before he's even started. He is incredibly talented, and because his parents have done that to him, he believes what he does is not good enough. He was working at a company, a gaming company, and they design games there, and he'd been doing work there for free. He'd been volunteering there for the longest time to get experience, and he was approached by Nintendo. Nintendo said that they wanted to take him on board for a particular project that they were doing. He turned it down because he wasn't good enough. He decided that he wasn't good enough because he was cut short from the opportunity before he even got the chance to move forward with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the difference is for myself as well. I wasn't brought up in an environment where I was necessarily taught you can't do this. You know, I was talking about earlier on that we've lived in a situation. My dad was self-employed for a majority of my childhood, and we'd have Christmases where we would barely get any presents. But we don't think back. You don't think back to Christmas as being bad. No, we don't think back to those times in our lives as being negative times. It was kind of like we've already lived that kind of alternative lifestyle, and I think that's why we kind of have it different. And I think that's why, I think things for Jon, Jon's had a hard time finding his way to do what it is he does, but he's done it. And I've had a much easier time, but at the same time I can see why others who haven't had the same situation as myself also have a hard time. And that's why when we originally started talking to you, Julie, about this is why Jon came into play in terms of conversation, because what Jon does literally puts perfectly what I was trying to work out that I felt needed to be highlighted. And I think when it came to this, this event, I don't think I was necessarily bringing a tale of woes for me, of things that have got in my way, as much of I've experienced people struggle, the difficulties. I've witnessed myself be able to do something and then someone else struggle alongside, but then I have things that I struggle with along the way as well. Mm-hmm. I find barriers a lot of the time that my barriers are myself. I'll hold something very, very sort of dear to myself, like, for example, like my friend did, he held to himself that he wasn't very good at what he did, so turned down work in that respect. That would have been perfect for him. That's literally what he wants to do with his life. And a lot of the time I think I cut myself short. I stop myself from doing certain things, and I think I use my artwork as a way of sort of being like, look, sometimes it's yourself that gets in the way.
So that's reflected very much in your artwork, particularly upstairs, isn't it? Where you've used those sentences that people have sent into you.
Which again, as Jon mentioned, the majority of those statements are from Twitter. The community that has kind of developed on Twitter is remarkable. The amount of times I'll go on there and you'll see two people interacting that you had no idea knew each other. They're almost like separate little encounters that kind of sometimes pass, and they all kind of do different things. They have creative pursuits, some sort of advocates for sort of mental health, and they all do very separate things, and they're all very passionate about what they do. And I think having that as a circle in there is incredibly supportive. And I think I think that's why that project for me that I did was important, because it was a way of I noticed that the way they behaved and the way that they pinned particular terms to themselves was the way that I did it. And I wanted to use a series of paintings, and I didn't want it to do it as just a kind of little project. I wanted it to be in an exhibition with this. I wanted it to be a kind of a focus point, because a lot of the statements that have been used in that are not necessarily sort of pleasant, but they are things that people have had said to them that they now wear as a name badge. And I didn't want that project to become a sort of anti-bullying campaign sort of feel to it, because I think sometimes when it sort of goes in a stereotypical sort of direction, people instantly switch off. So I think sometimes when it's a thing that I think is just human nature, where if you've seen something happen several times before, you're not going to interact with it. It's like something new and fascinating usually captures your attention a lot more. And I think I wanted to go down the route of kind of using it as not look at all the poor things that have been said to these people. It's more of, this is how these words have a reaction. This is how they become pretty much part of who we believe we are. So, you know, I now, through my diagnosis, I was referred to as pedantic. And I know that I probably am. But I think reading it in my diagnosis led me to then believe there have been so many times that I've been very passionate or very excited about a particular subject, and I can tell that I've been going on, and I just cut short. You know, cutting short something that, you know, we don't know where that conversation would have led. You know, you're kind of cutting short before you've even given it a chance to do anything, and it's because it was just one statement that was written in this. And I think that's why mental health in general, in the autistic sort of community in general, is quite bad. So I think a lot of people hold things to themselves very dearly.
Yeah. A lot of that's about being not fulfilled. You know, if someone says, completely misunderstands it all the time, that has a terrible effect on your mental health. You know, because you've got the inside of you who knows the truth. You know, I was just called thick and stupid at school. You know? Asperger's, autism, dyslexia weren't talked about. And you know, you're called thick every day, and by adults who you're told that you need to respect, and by teachers who you're told to respect even more than the adults you're told to respect outside the school. If they say you're thick and stupid, then you probably are. But I'm not, because I can do this, but I don't get a chance to show it. And then that just wipes you out for the rest of your life. And it's hard, you know, I fight against, you know, what I learned as a child every day. And there's a couple of things that Haydn said, you know, the first one about making a living. All artists have difficulty making a living, but for autistic people, it's really hard because we can't do those get out and get a job things to subsidise the other stuff we're doing as easily as anyone else.
I think the figures that the NAS put out, I think it was 16% of autistic adults are employed.
Full or part-time.
Yeah, full or part-time. It was like 16%. So it's
1/6.
So I think in terms of like employment, the numbers are very sort of, I think, shocking almost.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at that and you know that you're sort of part of that figure, but at the same time you don't sort of realise the extent of how much it's against you sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's like in my head, it was just like there's not necessarily anything that I think I can't do. So it's like I'll apply to this job, and in my head I'm thinking I can do that.
Yeah.
And you won't hear anything back, and it's because you don't, you know, I've been the sort of person who I didn't have experience, so I went out and I volunteered at my local Oxfam for 3 years to get experience. But then you'll go to something and they'll say it's not relevant experience, even though you're doing the same things in that location as you would in another retail setting. Like there's no difference. Like that store had people who would steal from it. That store would have, it's the same issues in terms of stock, in terms of running the store, in terms of locking up, using the till. The whole skill set is there. You take all of that on board by working there for 3 years. And you take that and you try to get across to an employer, this is what I've learned. It's like I couldn't find work, I couldn't get somewhere, so I tried to make a difference. And then they go and tell you that, oh, but that's not relevant. It wasn't probably, it kind of, when you spent so long working on something like that, you know, that was kind of like the option that came to your mind, like, I haven't got this thing that they're asking me to do, I'll go out and do it. And that was fighting pretty much everything that I'd never done before. Like, at the time, I think when I first started volunteering at Oxfam, my anxiety was probably at its worst. You know, it was a customer-facing sort of job, and I was a very sort of reserved individual at the time. And I think literally the experience like that has enabled me to be able to do public speaking like this. Because it can sometimes be like front. So it's like I'm talking like this now, and I've got this kind of determined sort of sense to me, and it's like I know what I'm doing, but I know for a fact that once I've done this tonight, I'm going to crash. It kind of, you don't realise how taxing it can be until you've stopped.
Can I ask you about outsider art and outsider artists? And obviously we were at an event on Monday that was discussing that term.
I think it was interesting because I mentioned that we'd been to the event to Jon, and as soon as I used the words outsider art, I saw Jon's face cringe instantly.
So can you just because we've all three of us have talked about this a little bit, so,
Yeah.
but not extensively. What do you think? Do you think that autistic artists are outsider artists, and do you consider yourselves as outsider artists?
I don't even know what outsider art even consists of.
Well, you know, almost technically, an outsider artist is someone who's self-taught. But people have added over the years to, you know, maybe they're on the, within the realms of mental health and obsessive and things like that, which we kind of fit. I don't mind the term, funny enough. There's a lot of highfalutin stuff spoken about it. But basically it's just people who want to make, and they make it, no matter what their social situation is. And they've kind of gone down an alternate route and not gone to college. I never went to art college. You know, one of my first shows I got because I went and left stuff in the gallery was at a place that, you know, then declared me an outsider artist. And I was kind of happier than being called a disabled artist, because for me, being called a disabled artist means, you know, if you say a disabled car, it means it doesn't work. So for me, it's always been, I'm a disabled, okay, I don't work, can't work as an artist. So there's been that literalistic block in my head. But, you know, I think there are different things meant by outsider art than people let on.
Right.
Put it that way.
I think it's sadly a money thing. I think it, especially with, I know that in America the market for outsider art is almost like a desired thing.
Yes.
Like it kind of, I think it's a term that people have used to kind of say, I have something different that you don't have. I think it's more of an art collector's term that has kind of seeped its way into the industry rather than a term that has been used by the artists themselves. So I think, I mean, don't quote me on that, I just think that's how I've kind of seen it. Because I felt that the event that we attended was very sort of odd. I felt that a lot of people were making a lot of very important points that were just going amiss. Like they were kind of being drowned underneath other issues and things like. I kind of feel, I understand that to run something like the Horseful, like Whitworth, things like that, it involves money. Everything involves money. That's how, as a society, it all moves along. But I think a lot of the time, when I started out doing Miscreation, when I started using that as a platform, my plan was never to get rich. My plan was to be able to afford a living so I could continue to do it. That's always been the plan, and it will always continue to be the plan. It's never been a, you know, you don't go into this industry as a means of making money, and you've got to be really careful, because I think a lot of people exploit a lot of people who have been dubbed outsider artists as well. You know, because I remember back when I was in uni, I remember a tutor having a really important discussion with me. I think it's when my mental health was really bad. She was saying we were talking about the value of work, and I was, you know, I often said that I didn't think that my work held any value. You know, we had to price our own work when we were selling it via exhibitions and things, and I find you know, that's really difficult to kind of put a value to what it is that I was producing. And she was really concerned that I was going to be one of those artists that produced all this work that became very popular, but was exploited in a way that I wasn't getting paid for it. Because I think a lot of people end up in situations where they love what it is they do, they share what it is they do, but then they don't end up making a living because they don't feel it holds a value. Mm-hmm. But it's very difficult to hold a value to something that oftentimes has it means part something more. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can mean something more to the other person than it does you.
Yeah.
And I think I find it quite difficult sometimes to understand how a lot of the paintings that I've got down here in particular have been created in my parents' garage on a slab of wood and a piece of carpet underneath. We were sat on the floor, and that's how I created my work. That was the space I had. That was the space I made use of. I've made those. I've put them in frames, and the concept being people, you know, I've put a value to them. People think they're worth that value. Even now, that's really strange to me. And even now I have to fight that as a thing to remind myself, you know, sometimes you have to remind yourself you've put time into this. You've put effort, you've put time. I studied at university for 3 years, even though I felt that I came away learning nothing from the fine art side of things. All I learned from the fine art side of the world was you created work, a bunch of people stood in front of it for a few minutes rubbing their chins, and if they decided it was good, you got a good grade. That was it. You rarely got the opportunity to talk about the work, you rarely had the opportunity to be able to sort of have that chance. And I think that's where my work in particular comes to light, where I have the chance to talk about it in person.
I just really enjoyed that conversation about sort of boxes and labels and that. And there's something in my mind about there are useful distinctions and there are not useful distinctions. There are creative distinctions and there are really, there's something about that. I can't quite articulate it very clearly, but it just struck me that's quite important. Sometimes you just got to say, you can have a label that just says, look, the reason I'm using this is because it says something important and gives you some sense of why I need, who I am. And then other times, well, this is you, and you're going to be, and that's a different label. There's a label that's a prison, and there's a label that this is useful for me at the moment, but just don't fix this on me, please, because tomorrow I might use a different label, but this might just be useful for this period of time, and then just don't keep me in that necessarily.
See, one of the biggest issues in the autism world at the moment is about women, because for years autism has been thought of as being male only, and so all the measures and prescriptions have been based on that. And so how do you diagnose women with a set of male measures? It's like with mental health. The reason mental health system does not work for neurodivergent people is because they use neurotypical measures of our mental health and neurotypical therapy to try and make us better, and then blame us when their measures don't suit, and blame us when their treatment doesn't work because we don't fit it. Well, actually, why don't you make something that's better fit for us? Which is, like I say, most autistic artists we deal with are women, and that really needs looked at. And it's just starting to in the research world, but they need to bring in measures both in mental health that are autistic specific, and they need to bring diagnostic features and markers that work for everyone, not just one subset. And I think this, the figures of, it's 9 autistic males to 1 autistic female, just need blowing out the window. And where is the autism research in other cultures, in other ethnicities? You're right, it's been very white, male-centric. Needs to change.
Well, thank you. And that's probably a good point to finish on. I'd really like to thank Haydn, and who's going to carry on, and Jon Adams as well. So thank you very, very much.